From start to finish, no team in the NBA has had to deal with more headaches throughout the year than the Philadelphia 76ers, and because of that, their season was quite the whirlwind. From a certain player holding out and refusing to play for them, to the constant trade rumors and drama that followed suit from it, to the distractions caused by all of it, it never really felt like this was a year where the Sixers were going to contend, but then when their big trade deadline deal went through, it offered a glimmer of hope to turn things around. They didn't go all the way this year, but they have a plan that will surprise many of you, and that trade was just the beginning. And this brings us to the topic of today's video. Today, we'll be discussing the current state of the team, how the way that their season ended will impact what they do in the offseason, and how, based on certain reports that are already coming out, I can see their plan unfolding in a way that I don't think many will see coming, especially with so many major decisions being made in this process. Before we start though, I want to thank PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. PrizePicks is the perfect service for all of us basketball fans here because when you're involved, it makes watching the games every night so much more fun and engaging. Basically, it's an application that provides you with lines on all kinds of individual player props, such as points, rebounds, assists, and three-pointers made amongst others, and you simply have to choose whether you believe they will record over the set amount in the line or under the set amount in the line. Make your selections, wager however much you want to, and if your picks hit, you can win some big money. For some picks that I'm looking at making for today's slate of games, I'm thinking of going with Kyle Lowry to dish out over 4.5 assists, Jimmy Butler to score over 23.5 points, and Kyle Lowry also to make over 1.5 threes. If this sounds at all intriguing to you, then go use the link down in the description of the video to sign up today and use promo code REFERENCE to receive a 100% deposit match bonus up to $100. Once again, thank you to PrizePicks for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to the topic at hand. So, as I mentioned in the intro somewhat vaguely, the Sixers had a lot to overcome this year before basketball even started to be played, because Ben Simmons decided that his days as a member of the team were over and refused to play until he got traded. That then turned into him not playing at all, even after he was traded, but that's a whole nother story. Because of this though, through February the team was playing with a guy being paid a max contract, contributing nothing to them, so obviously addressing that situation was the first domino that had to fall in order to get the team back on track. Now, I know I'm speaking in a rather matter-of-fact way about all of this, but we do need to acknowledge how ridiculous that situation was and how rare it is, because I can't remember ever seeing a player flat out refuse to play like that while demanding a trade in the NBA. Keep in mind the Sixers came into this season having just suffered a disappointing defeat to the Atlanta Hawks in the playoffs, so there were clearly things that the front office needed to address with the team, but because of the fact that they already had most of their money tied up elsewhere, they could only target players on minimum contracts in free agency. Luckily, they were able to convince Andre Drummond to sign on a minimum deal, despite obviously being able to get a bigger contract elsewhere, and the addition of George Niang on a minimum deal was also nice, but ultimately they weren't needle-moving deals that pushed them over any edge as a contender. When Ben Simmons finally got traded at the deadline, he, Andre Drummond, and Seth Curry were all packaged in a deal for James Harden, and that set the team back in the right direction. The team was doing a decent job staying afloat prior to the deal going down, but everyone knew that the Sixers' ceiling was capped by the situation, and bringing in Harden was a step in the right direction. They basically replaced Seth Curry and Andre Drummond with Harden, and that was a clear upgrade, but it doesn't mean that the team was perfect now by any means, because as you'll recall, I mentioned previously that the team had glaring weaknesses that they needed to address even before the Ben Simmons saga went down. The Sixers, to put it bluntly, are a top-heavy team with no real quality depth. Joel Embiid plugs so many holes to make this team appear better than they are, pretty much every impact metric backs this up, and the team's bench is filled with middling talent capable of producing every now and then, but never consistently, and there isn't any truly reliable players not included in the starting lineup that you can say for sure would be in the rotation of other playoff teams. In the regular season, the Sixers had the third worst scoring average from their bench in the entire NBA, and and in the playoffs, they had the absolute worst scoring average from their bench compared to the other playoff teams' benches. Yes, James Harden did begin to show signs of slowing down as a superstar talent, and also yes, the injury that Joel Embiid suffered that forced him to wear a mask against the Miami Heat in the playoffs are both big reasons why they came up short this year, but the thing that has been a consistent theme with the 76ers in recent history is that they have no real depth that can step up in big games. This finally leads us to the present day, where President Daryl Morey's plan seems to be beginning to unfold before our very eyes. The biggest reason why the 76ers are unable to build a balanced team with depth is because previous front office groups that came before Daryl Morey, such as the period when Elton Brand was in charge and the period when Brian Colangelo was in charge, set them back big time, and it takes work to undo those prior mistakes. The biggest mistake of all came when they paid Tobias Harris a max contract in the summer when most thought they would prioritize bringing back Jimmy Butler to the team. Tobias Harris is an objectively good, not great player who can score nearly 20 points per game, and he competed hard defensively this postseason, but his weaknesses in terms of finishing around the basket, shot selection, and decision making are not going to change, and he is who he is at this point, which is a player that will never produce at the level that will be deserving of the max contract he has. Because so much of the team's cap space is being used on this contract, along with Embiid being paid the max, and Ben Simmons previously, which then turned into James Harden now, also being paid that much, the team has limited resources to sign other quality talents to surround them with. On top of this, James Harden is approaching a new contract as well, and there have been plenty of discussions surrounding what his new deal could look like. He is eligible to sign a contract that will become worth more than any contract signed in NBA history, and most people seemed to assume that the Sixers were just going to throw the bank at him in order to retain him, but based on how he performed to close out the season, there are legitimately worrying signs of his best days being behind him, and if his production continues to decline, then a contract of that magnitude would become catastrophic. James Harden has always been a player I've enjoyed watching, and I've been one of his biggest believers from the start, but at this point in his career, there's just no way anyone can justify paying him that much money, and I think the Sixers know that too. He has a player option for next season that he will likely opt into, but beyond that, it is still to be determined, and there are already rumors swirling within league circles, according to ESPN analyst Zach Lowe, that Harden would be willing to accept a lesser deal to help build an actual contender. This brings us to the next and most pivotal part of their offseason plan, which is to move on from Tobias Harris in a trade. When Harris first signed his contract, he instantly became a nearly untradeable asset because his deal was worth 5 years, which is a long time. But now that there are only 2 years remaining on his contract, it becomes much more manageable to convince another general manager to bring him in because it is no longer a long-term agreement. Even still, the Sixers will have to add more to an offer if they actually want anything of value back, and who better than Matisse Thybulle, who is a young player who made the all-defense team now for a second season in a row. Once again, reports this week have stated that the Sixers are definitely willing to include Thybulle in a trade offer this summer. And as I have now mentioned several different rumors and reports floating around, you need to take note of this stuff. When something big is brewing, the exact plan is never what leaks early, but rather you tend to hear about little bits and pieces in the lead up to it. Tobias Harris's name has been in trade rumors since the trade deadline, when the Sixers apparently discussed possibly sending him to the Thunder, and the teams were in discussions at the time, but they fell through. Matisse Thybulle is now in the news because of his apparent availability, and on top of that, the Sixers might be keeping their first-round pick that they traded to the Brooklyn Nets because the Nets have an option to defer it to next year, and they're leaning towards doing that at the moment. That right there combined is a trade package that could get you somewhere in trade discussions. Now, earlier in the video, I was discussing the reasons why it will be difficult for the Sixers to add quality depth, so with this potential offer as a starting point, they may instead be star hunting this offseason. According to Sports Illustrated, the worst kept secret around the NBA right now is that the Philadelphia 76ers and team president Daryl Morey want to add a third All-Star to pair with Joel Embiid and James Harden. Who could that star player be? Well, at the moment, I have two candidates that come to mind, being Bradley Beal and Zach Lavine, and while I'm not saying that they are 100% going to be successful to acquire them, I am putting two and two together here. I've mentioned in prior videos that I firmly believe the only reason that Bradley Beal hasn't requested a trade yet is because he's waiting to sign a massive contract extension in Washington that he can't sign anywhere else, and then he'll ask out as long as they're still middle of the table. Beal has been a player that Daryl Morey has also tried to trade for in the past, so there's a clear connection there. With Zach Lavine, the ways they can go about getting him are much more unlikely, but not impossible. They first need to find a team to be willing to accept Tobias Harris's contract as a salary dump, and as this has already been discussed previously with Oklahoma City, as I said earlier, a team notorious for bringing in salary dumps as long as draft capital is attached, this isn't far-fetched. Then convincing Lavine to sign with them in hopes of winning a championship becomes an actual possibility money-wise. Now, to conclude, they haven't come right out and said it, but based on every piece of information floating around that we've discussed today, it really seems like the Sixers will be one of the most aggressive teams this summer. Whether or not these deals that I hypothesized in this video actually happen is still to be determined, but it really seems as though they're going to try as hard as they can to make it happen. And with that being said, that's all I have for you today. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment down below what kind of moves you think the Sixers will make this offseason. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.